So, this episode is going to be a really cool episode because it comes from a conversation that Idun and I were having where we were looking at the identity shift that we're working on and then putting that in context of the future of what's coming and how that's going to play out and how the work that we're doing shifts and changes in that period and what this means for you. And every time I think about this, Idun and I talk about it, I feel really connected to purpose. I feel like we are sitting on the edge of a superpower that is literally going to change the game in a world that's totally unfamiliar, that we don't know. And so that's a little bit of the context of what we're going to talk about today. And it comes from this idea that Idun and I both made incredibly big life changes. We both worked at the same organization, and we both left that known world of the 9 to 5 and have reoriented ourselves in non-traditional ways of working, in non-traditional lifestyles. And yet, the things that we use to do that are going to take on a whole new another level in this next thing where there isn't moving from the familiar to the unfamiliar. It's everything will be unfamiliar. And that is where this conversation that you're about to hear comes from. So, Idun, since you left the organization that we worked at before I did, 2 years actually, you left in 2017 and I left in 2019. Um, do you want to tell your journey about leaving that and leaping into the unknown and the identity shift that accompanied that?
Yeah, sure. It was, I think if I were to say that I've had a midlife crisis, that would probably be it. I, um, I got to a point in my life where I was checking the boxes so hard and being the good girl to such an extent that it burnt me out. It made me feel hollow. I didn't feel purposeful in really anything of what I did. And it was this persistent feeling for a long period of time. And I just got to a point where I knew I needed to do something. At that point, I hadn't really started my inner development journey, if you will. So it was more pain that pushed me over the line than it was intention or being very purposeful in what I was going to do next. But yeah, I basically decided to resign. I ended a 7-year long relationship, and I sold all my things and packed up the rest. And then I bought a one-way ticket to Southeast Asia. And I took a backpack with me. That was all, with a laptop, and that was my that was me diving into the unknown, and, it was exhilarating. It was full of possibility and opportunity and dreaming and being excited about what came next and who I would get to be. And it was, of course, also accompanied by a lot of fear, a lot of "Shit, what did I just do?" And, it was a good mix of the 2, and there was definitely a period of being in the messy middle, not knowing what was going to happen and just rolling with it.
Well, so what I'd be curious about is what you mentioned there, because you've shifted now from making that leap with no intention. But you were talking about you feel exhilaration, you felt excitement, you could be whoever you wanted to be. So why wouldn't you just continue to do it that way? Why would you have gotten intentional and purposeful about how you make these shifts?
I think for me, it was a journey of figuring out what my values were, and that was a pivotal point for me, and actually something that you helped me figure out, which I'm eternally grateful for, because that is the compass that I have used over the years to create a life that is true to me, a life that is full of freedom, full of learning and growth, new not opportunities, new experiences. And that was not something that came very quickly to me. Like, this was for me a process over years. It probably could have been accelerated a whole lot if I had gone in intentionally to do it, which is what we now help people do, right? To accelerate that process. But it was it was a journey of discovering who I was and what those values were, and, the more I was able to understand them, the easier it became to create the life that felt really good and allowed me to keep that feeling that you mentioned there.
Yeah. It's amazing how much being able to keep that feeling changes your experience, because when I left the organization that we worked at, I was really already struggling with this idea of I'd had my son, I was working full time. I did both at 110%, but you can't be 220% of a person. And so my shift was also sort of not intentional. It was life giving me this uh-oh crisis moment of something's got to give. And so I shifted and I changed and I left that organization. But looking back now and looking at what I'm going through in terms of the uncertainty and the mapping the path forward, etc., it's 100% different. And the difference is there's not a monkey on my back as much as there was before. Because I look back and when I left the organization and I, was doing coach training, was figuring out how to set up a business, etc., had more time for my son, had time to arrange his therapy, etc., I could have really enjoyed that time. It could have been totally exhilarating. And it was at moments. Sure, there were peaks in it, right? I learned something new. I get an outcome with a client. Those there were peaks, but in the broad scale, if you look at the bigger picture, that experience wasn't the best time of my life because of the monkey sitting right there saying, "Oh, you're not working hard enough." And, rolling out all the old beliefs that just do not serve you. Work has to be hard. You can't build a business without working hard. You're not working hard enough. That kind of chatter going through my mind and it looking at life through the lens of scarcity. And I think that is the difference between then and now, which is why I can dance in the kitchen now, even though there is uncertainty in my life. There's um, sort of new ways of doing it. And when you learn to practice that new way of being within the same or very similar familiar challenge, that's when it becomes a superpower. And it's so cool because people actually think you're walking on water. Because I've had people in the midst of a breakup look at me and say, "Thank you for your energy. It's awesome. What are you taking?" And I'm like, "Ah, I'm just working on the ways of being that we get." That was during our abundance challenge. And I'm telling you, I find it so extraordinary. But one of the things that comes up for me now is that it is a superpower. It's a superpower that people actually notice. It's one of those really hard ones that's so hard to mention. It's like, "Hey, what's up with you?" You can't say, "Oh, I went to Vietnam and I had this great trip." You could talk about your inner journey and then they think you're just crazy. Really? But yet they have already noticed that something's different about you. They can't quite pinpoint it. So they think it's probably something external, right? It isn't the internal world that's shifted, it's that you've done something. You went on a yoga retreat. But I've been on those kinds of retreats, and you come back and there's a sense of different possibility, etc., that once it collides with your old life and you're back in the familiar, it it dissipates pretty quickly. You lose that connection. It's like 2 different worlds, and it's almost like you have to be in one environment to have that in a different environment to have that feeling, and when you get back to your environment, it's no longer possible. And what I love about what the work that we're doing is that we have found that that isn't true, that you can be in the familiar and you can still feel extraordinary even when life isn't working out quite like you thought it was. And actually, a friend, used the word "life is lifing," and actually, I don't know if that was you, Idun, or another friend, Hannah, but, um, life is lifing, I think, is exactly what goes on all the time. This is the thing that we don't have control over, though we often think we do. And so, how do you feel extraordinary to the point where people notice it and ask in the middle of it? And when you can do that, it is a superpower. It is like you are walking on water in the middle of the storm and people notice. And so, in this new context that's coming, it's going to be a game changer.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and, the analogy that comes to mind when you talk about retreats, it's like an infusion that you get it's like a one-time shot that has a certain lasting effect, and then you come back to your, like you say, normal reality, and it tapers off, and if you haven't actually built the habit, you haven't changed the mindset, the reflex that you have, then things go back to the way they were very quickly. And so that's what I love about the challenge that we've created and that we're running, the rose colored glasses, because you get the opportunity to practice every day and to build that habit. And when you do that, things shift. You see things differently and you approach your challenges in life differently because yes, life is always lifing. We can't stop that. And I think, what you're alluding to now, and I'm sure that people have caught on to what we are talking about, the shift that is coming. We're obviously talking about artificial intelligence and how the world is going to change when or is already changing. I'm curious to hear, what do you think will be the greatest challenge for people in terms of their inner world when their external world will change so significantly?
Well, it's interesting because we build identities and personas that give us a role in this world, that give our lives meaning and that give us a way to contribute, a way to be relevant. And when that's all upended, because if experts are correct, it could mean things like my son, who's 8, may never in his lifetime work. How many of us, certainly you and I did, with that idea of tying our worth to what we did
Mm.
in terms of the work. And you get a level of worth based on how much you do, based on what sector and industry you're in. Social work, who cares about that? Banking, now that you're at a much higher level, right? We have this hierarchy in our heads of worth that is constructed out of performance and job. And it has taken me a decade to unravel and undo and unbuild that so that I can begin to reconstruct that, and another decade to actually reconstruct what I want that pyramid of worth to look like. And it is the inverse of what society tells us and what so many people tie their worth to. So when you think about the fact that our kids may never have jobs, when you think about that, or you think about us who have had our identities tied to this for so long, walking through a world where we're not really needed anymore. How are we going to get our worth? And this becomes so incredibly important that you can then redefine your identity such that you're able to anchor inside yourself and bring forth the thing that you would love to create that isn't based on the need to make your family survive. Because how many of us, I certainly did for years, wake up and go to work because you do. You have to. You got to feed your family somehow. There is no other way. And so, in some ways, this opens up an incredible opportunity. I personally think that we orient our lives around this idea that we are a mind. Oh, that little organ in the black box that can't see anything, which I think is quite amusing, but it is the boss. It directs every move that the body makes. And it's like the body is the vehicle that the mind can do something on earth. But when you look at it that way, you lose a lot of sense of purpose. What We weren't here. We were not born just to work and die, right? To sleep, grind it out, sleep again. But I did that for decades, for years. And I thought that's how it was and that there was no other way. And so, what I love about this constellation of world events is that if we are no longer needed, need to survive, need to work, right? We can live our true purpose, which is, for in my personal belief, that we are spirits. We are not a mind attached to a body who may or may not have a spirit to give our lives deeper meaning and a sense of purpose. We are spirits who have a mission here, and we are tethered to the earth through the body. And the mind, it should just be observing the body. It should not be directing all of its behavior. It should be noting things so the body can take into account what it needs to take into account and share the messages that it needs to share, such that we can actually transcend our own limitations and learn to fully embody and inhabit ourselves. And when we do that, we change the energetic shape of the world. And that energetic shape change ripples outward, and the whole world changes. And so that's, I think, probably the biggest opportunity that AI offers us in a world where we're going to not have the same relationship to it that we had before in terms of performance and role and identity. But that's why I think it's so important to do this work in the familiar. But I think actually, having made the leap, because your leap was a lot bigger than mine, I didn't change when I left the organization we were at. My apartment stayed the same. My kid was in school. That all stayed the same. So a lot of what changed was my internal world, but you shifted both your external and your internal world. So can you talk a little bit about why it would be easier to do it in the familiar versus trying to do this kind of work when nothing looks the way that you thought it would, or that you understand and know, that you make meaning of?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing is that when you make a leap, but the world around you is still familiar, it feels like you have a recourse. So there's even though you've taken a leap into the unfamiliar, you still sort of have an attachment to the familiar. You could get another job. That will be the concrete example if things didn't work out the way you wanted them to. Um, but now, what we are faced with right now, for many people, that is not going to be an option. They may be able to pivot. They may be able to find a way to create value with AI. But for many of us, we're simply going to be not needed anymore because the revolution that's coming is it can do it so much better than we can, so much faster. And so it's going to create an identity crisis for a lot of people. And that is, in some ways, very scary to think about. But like you said, it's also an incredible opportunity to really find out who we are, what we care about, and what other type of impact we can create in the world through getting to know ourselves better and letting that intuition, that inner knowing that you have, but that you've been pushing down because you've been checking all the boxes and you've been too busy to listen to it and see how that unfolds. And I think that is the most exciting opportunity that we're faced with now. But it does require doing the inner work because if you wait, if you don't take action, and if you haven't started this journey already, it will come out of nowhere, or at least it will feel like it comes out of nowhere. You'll be ill prepared. And I'm a little bit concerned, to be honest, about the people who do not think through this ahead of time and take action preemptively. And I think that is what the message we want to convey as well with this podcast episode is there's still time and there's still an opportunity to do that and to prepare yourself for what's coming and the opportunity that it presents to you.
Yeah. For those who take advantage of the opportunity, it will be heading into something with excitement and exhilaration rather than dread and being dragged behind. I like to say this because it just feels exactly the way life feels. But when I was learning to water ski and I would fall and then I would be dragged behind the boat because they tell you, let go of that rope. But your instinct is to grab on, to hold on, to stabilize yourself, right? But when you do that, like, you get dragged behind in the flood of water coming into your system that you can't control. I mean, it's insane, but that is what we do. We lock down, we grab onto old patterns we already know don't work, and we try to do even more of the same because we're so good at doing when what it requires is a different way of being. But what came up for me when I was hearing you talk is that idea that it is that inner knowing, that intuition, and I had lost complete touch with it. I was so used to suppressing it, saying, "You're wrong, you're right," and actually what was in here was all coming from external, all my senses were turned outward. I was getting information of what's good, what's bad, and putting that in, and then that's where I would make all my decisions, and so the life that I had designed was no longer really mine. I mean, sure, it was successful. It was never gonna be a life that I felt fulfilled in. And so that idea that I've completely lost touch with it because I've just totally told my sacral, "You are wrong. This is just it's annoying, get out of the way." That when I actually tried for the first few times, I mean, it took me a few weeks to even get in touch with the sacral. And even now, it still isn't that steady, consistent source of information, of decision-making power, of authority that I should be using at all times. And I can tell a massive difference when I use it. And luckily now I'm using it almost the inverse, right? Instead of using it 10% of the time, I'm using it 90% of the time. But in those moments of the 10% still, when I don't use it, life feels like I'm being dragged behind that ski boat again instead of when you start to fall and you let go of it, a lot of times you regain your balance because you've got your arms out in a different position, and then actually you're slowly surfing as the skis slow down, and then you just kinda sink in the water, and often your head never even goes under. In fact, I learned a trick at that time where you could slow down just enough right at the dock that you could actually jump onto the dock without getting wet. So I could actually go skiing by starting from the dock, jumping onto the dock, and never get wet. And that was I mean, if you apply that to life, right? You're in the same conditions. You're in the same turbulent water. You're behind a boat that is pulling you at a speed that you have no control over because somebody else is setting that mechanism. And yet I get dragged behind, unable to breathe, feeling like I'm drowning and dying, or I cannot even get wet. And that's when it looks like a miracle to other people. They say, "How do you do that?" And honey, all it is for me was practice of getting dragged behind the boat 1,000 times. But I can't imagine what it would be like to try to do this when it's dirt that you're being dragged through instead of water, when it's not a boat, it's a spaceship. I don't know, right? Like when the world is completely unfamiliar, because that's when those patterns come back full force. And if you haven't used that inner knowing and you're disconnected from it, the idea of trying to get connected to it and begin to use it when what your instinct will be is to lock down and grab those old ways of being, it might mean
They
that your
don't
muscles
apply
come out
anymore.
stronger, but the experience is gonna be something I don't envy anyone.
So what do you think should be for people who are listening now and they are maybe having a realization that something needs to change? What do you think their first step should be?
I think their first step should be acceptance. That doing more of the same isn't working, that they're gonna need a new system, that the old systems are gonna be outdated. And that step in and of itself is big.
Mm.
When was the last time you practiced acceptance and how did that go?
I've had some interesting, acceptance work done in, relation to some family members recently, but I think we'll save that for another episode.
Oh. Yeah, this summer I'm about to go get to practice that. Somehow it's that thing of you visit your parents and you've done all this work and you think that, okay, I've got these new ways of being, I'm gonna walk in. And then all of a sudden you want to cling to those old patterns and you're 14 or 16 again and you don't know how this has happened. Then it reminds me of a post that we wrote recently, which was about the idea that life needs to give you these things back that feel familiar so that you can practice. Because honestly, you don't get from being dragged behind the boat to hopping onto the dock on your skis without boatloads of practice, right? Pun
Yeah.
intended. but but who wants to practice? But to be honest, it's part of that idea that the experience shifts. The meaning, when you assign meaning to it, to what you're going through the hard thing that you're doing, and you're feeling like, "Holy shit, I thought I did this already. I've got to do it again." When you assign a meaning that this is part of how you embody it, and the more that you can embody it, this is actually what you're gonna bring forth to the world, it gets easier because then I know every time I'm working on frustration, sadness, all the negative feelings that we assign, I'm actually also working on the backside complement, right? Joy, satisfaction, ease. So that for me reorients a lot. But that practice of acceptance is that sitting with what is, the welcoming the unwelcome. Oh, I don't know about you, but what does it feel like when you're presented with a challenge and you're like, oh, this is making me feel sick inside in whatever way sick is, right? So you're so frustrated, you literally want to tear your hair out or throw something, or you feel so sad, really just deeply sad that you find yourself crying on the couch in the middle of the day, or maybe it's hormones that happens as well. But whatever the negative feeling is, how many times do you disconnect? Because going into your body, does it feel safe to go into your body? It reminds me of something that actually worked really well for me, which is that idea that you time limit it and you tie it to something that you do that's oblivion, right? Because you're seeking to get away from that discomfort, that feeling you don't want to have, the knowledge that you don't want to know. And so it would be right before I would watch Netflix, and I would still let myself watch Netflix. But right before it, I would say, okay, I'm going to try and do 1 minute. Then I'm going to do 3 minutes of just sitting with this. And maybe I'd have a journal next to me and I wouldn't actually write anything. And maybe I just sit there and try not to zone out. And then after 1 minute or 3 minutes, I'd watch my Netflix. And then the next night, it was like 4 or 5 minutes. And then finally, I was actually journaling before, but it was always the Netflix. And that was the key for me that said, okay, you're looking for relief inside. There's some tension here that's not processed. The Netflix, the donuts, the the alcohol, whatever it is, right, is gonna give me the relief that I'm looking for. And so, if you can tie it to the thing that you're using and find a very time limited window to practice, that strengthens that muscle every day. And so now it used to take 3 weeks, takes 3 hours, right? First it was
Mm,
3 days, then it was 3 hours, now it's 3 minutes, like, it gets so much shorter, and that's game changing because that's when you can begin to do things in real time,
mm,
and your experience of the thing shifts so much. When you go through it in 3 minutes and you just kind of let it flow through you because you learned how to do that and you strengthen that muscle. And then, can you remember back to the days where you would walk around for days with this story in your head and all of your emotional energy just went whoosh right into that, and you did the all the other things in your life on total autopilot and had no memory of doing any of that. And then now it's 3 minutes. And all it was practicing on something small, and manageable and
Yeah.
doable. I mean, that's what I think the other message I'd like people to take home is that the thing that we're encouraging them to do isn't rocket science. You don't need training, meaning to go get a PhD in something. You don't need to become a coach even, right? You just need to practice.
Yeah.
And I think one of the key things that we found is doing it together is, oh man, it's so much more fun. But it's you just don't feel alone, and somebody else
Yeah.
has a better objective picture.
Yeah, and I think we often fall into the trap of, like, signing up for time-limited courses or programs or things that are marketed to you to solve one specific thing in a very specific, amount of time. And then we go through that program and maybe we implement some of it, we don't implement all of it, and we don't practice, or at least we don't practice enough to make it that habit. We don't practice enough to shorten that time from the uncomfortable emotion to having processed it. And, yeah, that's really what we're trying to encourage people to do is, like you said, it's not rocket science, and it's going to the gym a little bit every day, right? It's just like you
Mm.
do when you work out. You need to keep it warm. You need to keep it a habit in order to benefit from, or to get the benefits from it. And you can do it with other people, and that makes it so much more fun. So it's an ongoing thing. It's like it's something that you pepper into your day, into your life as a habit, and it creates the foundation for feeling better and making better choices and being better to the people around you.
Yeah, and it's that thing of I have a friend who yeah, she still does this. She's been doing this for decades, where she will go to the gym and do something like body pump or something, and she hasn't been in 6 months, and then she will go all out lifting heavy weights because she is gonna get the benefit of that workout, and what that means is she doesn't exercise again for another 6 months because the memory of the pain of that is so big, and so it's when you said going to the gym, that's what came up for me. It is, but it's small, steady, consistent. It's that thing of did I used to do this thing where I hated running, and so I would say, "Okay, you just have to go out and run for 10 minutes, 5 minutes sometimes, and if you can run for 5 minutes, you can quit." And often, after running for 5 minutes, I think, "Okay, I can do 5 more." And then I wouldn't even be pushing myself so much, and then by the end, I'd have 20 minutes under my belt, and I'd feel pretty good about that. And it's that thing of it wasn't that hard to do. If you're pushing that hard, it's an issue. You need to just chill out a little bit and practice being rather than because 'cause you're doing the being. Oh my god, I'm such an expert at that. The doing of being. How many more things can I do? What 12-step program can I find to be better,
Yeah.
to be more, to be bigger, to
Now.
be stronger, to be more capable? It's definitely something that I think when you integrate it into your life in a sustainable way, then you don't get that thing of you do 10 push-ups in a year because well, maybe 20 because you do 10 every 6 months, right? You do 1 per day, and then you've got 365 push-ups. That's a whole different ballgame. The actual work of the subconscious gets done when you're quiet and you're not
Mm,
doing. And so building this into a habit and a routine before the world becomes unpredictable, or let's say more unpredictable than it is now. Because right now, yeah, some people have already lost their jobs. Conflict in the world is increasing. Migration has already increased. The climate has shifted. You think about all of that coming together to change and where you've got those consistent patterns, and that's what you cling to. The experience of moving through this is going to be night and day, 100% different. And I am so grateful that you and I started doing this work, that we are forming these habits, that we have each other, that we have the community, because that means our experience isn't going to be miserable. It's going to be connected. It's going to be exhilarating instead of draining. It's gonna be focused on possibility and oriented toward that. I think part of what we're working on too is literally also the thing that makes us different than machines. It's what makes us most human. It is that internal world. And if you look at, I mean, they've compared this from moving from the horse and cart to the iPhone, but instead of doing it over hundreds of years, we're doing it over 5. And you think of the pace, the acceleration, and the fact that 10 years ago, I used to feel at the mercy of life. Life happened to me. Life didn't happen through me.
So, we've talked a lot about the changes that are coming, and we talked about what we think will allow people to thrive through that change and to see it as an opportunity and create opportunities from it. But more specifically, what are we advising people to do next?
Well, I think one of the things that we developed that works the best is the easiest and is such a great experience is our 14-day rose-colored glasses experience because it takes everything that we've talked about. Practicing acceptance, sitting with what is, right? Shifting your point of view and coming at the world from abundance rather than scarcity, doing it in community, finding meaning and purpose in what you're doing. All of those things are in this challenge. And what's cool is that you see that it's every day, it's habit, it's consistency. It is a community that is always there at your fingertips that you can get engaged with. But it isn't the hard lift of the gym when you've got too much weight on and your muscles are screaming for mercy, right? It is the thing that gives you joy. And then you begin to really, in an embodied way, experience the shift that we're talking about, such that it makes you want to do more of it. And it's so fun. So that is what I would say the next step is to come and join us. Come and play because inner development, it isn't something that has to be done when everything's miserable. It is something that can be done when you don't have a challenge. And if you do have a challenge, then it absolutely changes not only the way you experience it, but as your internal landscape shifts, then your external landscape begins to shift. So you get a twofold benefit. Your miserable experience changes when life doesn't change. And then your life does change to match the energetic component that you're putting out there. And it's so cool to see that shift in real time and to get those messages from community participants who have just said, "Hey, I saw something new today and I chose to do something completely different that I never would have done before. And now I see a massive difference in my life." So come and join us.
Definitely, we've seen some massive shifts of the people who have participated in the challenge so far. So there's no reason to hesitate. It is free, and we will link it in the show notes under this episode. But thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this conversation today. And we will see you again next week.